Right. Hello, everybody. And this is our fourth program here in this new series of essays from externalization of the hierarchy. We've begun on section 2. Now let's see, what does that say? What's section 2 all about here? The general world picture. Okay, now remember this is in 1938 or so. And, to give a little bit of the historical background that has led to our present world situation, we left off with this discussion of why the world unrest, why the present world unrest, and certainly we're still in the middle of a tremendous world unrest with potentials either for emergence in the right way into the Aquarian Age or for a possible retardation, which could last, as the Tibetan first discussed it, maybe 300 years. But now, since that time, he has talked about a possible destruction of humanity and a reversion all the way back to its beginnings to see if there might not be raised up a humanity in which the spiritual values could be truly developed. That would be, of course, the disaster of disasters. In any case, why the present world unrest? Because of the evolutionary point humanity has reached, because of the emergence of a new racial type, sub-race 6 of the 5th root race leading into the 6th root race to be concentrated, I think, very much. South America will have a big role to play, let's put it like that, but also Europe and the Americas. The ending of the Piscean Age, both the smaller age of Pisces and a larger Platonic year of some 25,000 years or maybe more, at a time in the immediate future that we do not yet comprehend because our science will not take us there. And the same for the Aquarian Age, the beginning of a smaller cycle, Aquarian Age, and the entrance into, it's rounded off, of course, into a 25,000 year Aquarian Age. I guess the best way to measure it is with the overlap periods of some 5,000 years when you're dealing with such a, or is it 500 years? Yeah, okay, it's 5,000 when we're dealing with the 250,000, and it's a 500-year overlaps when dealing with the Platonic years, I do believe. Okay, now let's look a little further. And the reasons for the present world unrest. Further reasons. Number 5, the time of the end, the judgment is coming. This is the entrance into the full new age. And, many big cycles are ending at this point. Libra becoming powerful as the sign of judgment in the planetary horoscope. In the Aquarian spirit, the leveling of all classes and distinctions. And what else? Okay. I just want to get these to be marked properly. As this one as well. The time of the end. Well, many people think the end times will lead us simply into planetary annihilation, but that is not the plan, given that the Earth is the base of the spine chakra of the of the solar logos. It wouldn't do, would it? And the approach of the hierarchy and of other great avatars, and, well, the power and significance of the spreading of the great invocation. These are all reasons for the amazing present world unrest that we are experiencing. Now, the next section, under section 2, the hidden sources of the outer turmoil. Now, remember, what we're doing here, it is a bit of a historical retrospective indeed, but these developments, the way we responded to them, the way we responded to opportunities or missed opportunities, have all led to the present world situation, one in which the Tibetan warned that we might be as the man who swept his house clean of many devils and returned later to find that the house was infested by even more devils. So through neglect, after the great house cleaning of the Second World War, or the Great War, if you want to look at it that way, we may have found ourselves in an even worse situation. Certainly, we don't know the hidden causes of the turmoil from the perspective of the forces of evil. The counterforce, the forces of materialism, the material forces, they are laboring or struggling or fighting militantly to prevent the proper entrance of humanity into the Aquarian Age. I remember reading from Madame Roerich something about this figure called Satan. Of course, from Blavatsky's perspective, Satan really are the light bringers, the solar angels, but it's possible to conflate that term with the idea of pure evil or the devil, and it wants a huge explosion, apparently, on this planet, and to float away on the wreck. Something of that nature sticks in my mind. Anyway, the consequences at the moment are dire, or very, very promising for the emergence of a truly spiritual humanity. And we, interior workers, students of esotericism, meditative workers, we are doing our very best to make sure that the best spiritual consequences emerge. And if we neglect our duty, we may be in the same position as those disciples who were insufficient in their numbers before the Second World War, and because of that insufficiency, the war precipitated when it need not have precipitated physically. We are in the midst of a war. I've said that many times. It's a war being fought out for the values which will guide humanity. The present preservation of values is the duty or the goal of the initiate on the first ray. I think this is found, and it's really worth knowing where it is. Getting this book out here. It's found in the Rays and the Initiations, around page 506 or 507, and it's really worth considering. I'll go to 506, and we'll see where we are here. Okay. Now, the Rays and the Initiations. Come. Here it is. And this time I'm going to highlight it so I don't lose it so easily. The preservation of values is the task of the initiate, of the first ray, the attainment of positivity is the goal of the initiate of the second ray. He who works upon the third ray must reach the path from here to there. That's progress, right? That's evolution through the intellect. And the initiate of the fourth ray arrives at the will aspect when conflict steps into its rightful place. So apparently all of this is about arrival at the will aspect and the right use of the will in 7 different ways, and causes no undue concern. These 4 attainments mark the goal for men and sway them all upon the lower point of consciousness. At least this is our striving as disciples and coming initiates on these rays. The ray of vision and of application indicates the way direct, evokes the will to follow, and welds the love of God, the love of man, and all that breathes into the purpose underlying all. The ray of vision, I suppose, is the 6th ray, and the ray of application the 5th, and towards that purpose and its earthly consummation, the 7th ray gives all it has, facilitating the work of the other rays. So page 507, I guess, and kind of keep in mind where that is, because it does give our objectives when we have attained to the status of the initiate. I mean, maybe some of us have attained to the status of initiate of the threshold, or, probationary initiates of the first degree or second degree, as was the case among the Tibetan students to whom he was writing letters, but very few, maybe Alice Bailey, maybe Roberto Assagioli, maybe Foster Bailey, I don't know, had attained to the status of the true third degree initiate. Anyway, once you arrive there, those are your goals, and during the probationary period, you are practicing that which will make you effective in the attainment of those goals when you become the true initiate. Okay, so that was just a little deviation there. And now we're on page 71, the hidden sources of the outer turmoil. And now notice we've entered the year 1939, a fateful year in terms of entering the war. Once the invasion of Poland had occurred in 1939, then many of the Allied powers, especially Great Britain, declared war on Germany, realizing that the Nazi regime would stop at nothing in their aggressive desires for greater hegemony, greater sway in Europe, first Europe, and then the world, I suppose. Another angle from which the world situation can be viewed with profit is to look for the hidden source of the outer turmoil. Now, he's already given us a number of the developments which have led at least to unrest. Now he's using the word turmoil and not just unrest. Okay, so note the word turmoil. Okay. This is seldom what men think it is, for the source lies in the realm of energies and forces. As I explained elsewhere, okay, cross-referencing is so important when we're studying the Tibetan. As I've often said, is one big book, really. All of his 19-something books and Alice Bailey's 4.5 books, you might say, are they're all to be fused together into one great body of knowledge, and take the secret doctrine and the best writings of Blavatsky and put them in as well. It is the modern revelation of theosophy, though it's just a drop in the bucket compared to this great and universal wisdom. As I explained elsewhere in The Destiny of the Nations, pages 3 to 47, there are three great streams of energy working powerfully in the world at this time, and two others are also struggling for expression, making the five that together will determine the trend of world affairs. Okay, there was a little chapter there, a chart. It was a chart, and I wonder if it pays for me to try to very quickly locate that chart. And I think, okay, that's maybe here, and no, not so easy, materialism, and perhaps there can be found what we're looking for. Well, okay, I'm not going to find that chart right now, but he's going to repeat it, and it was called at one point the Jewish force, which had ray 3 and ray 7. Okay, 3 rays, and there's only 2 of them, and we're not going to see that the way we would like to, unfortunately. No. All right. Well, it's there in one of these books for sure. Let's look at how he lists these 5 streams of energy, 3 great streams of energy, and 2 others working powerfully for expression. Let's see how he lists them, because as students of esotericism, we have to care about energies and forces above all. The first and most powerful force is that pouring into the world from Shamballa. You know, there have been a number of Shamballa impacts, mostly very destructive, and before this book was written, let's just say 3 had occurred, I think, 3 major ones, and one was in 1825. And 2 others brought Atlantis and Lemuria, respectively, to an end. So, excuse me, the first and most powerful force is that pouring into the world from Shamballa, the planetary center where the will of God is known. Only twice in our planetary history has this Shamballa energy made its presence felt directly. Okay, well, maybe that's a little different, from what we're calling a Shamballa impact. The first time when the great human crisis occurred at the individualization of man in Lemuria, there was tremendous destruction, we're told, of the animal man forms of the period as the solar angels gained their entrance into the vehicles. And the second time in Atlantean days in the great struggle between the lords of light and the lords of material form, also called the dark forces. Today, this force streams out from the holy center. It embodies the will aspect of the present world crisis, and its 2 subsidiary effects or qualities are. Okay, and I just want to say, though, that there was, in the volcanic conclusion of Lemuria, there was much of the Shambhala force, and he has told us that in 1825 there was also the presence of the Shambhala impact. Let's see if I'm correct here. I think so. Shambhala 1825, and there's just a couple of references. So yeah, it looks like here's one in Externalization of the Hierarchy. when this direct line of spiritual dynamic electric energy made its first impact on Earth after the Great Council held in 1825. Okay, definitely there. And the determination to apply this touch, he's calling it a touch of Shamballa, which is in the nature of a great experiment, was made in 1825 when the Great Council had its usual centennial meeting. All this has speeded up, and little such growth was seen prior to 1825. The inflow since 1825 of the will energy from Shambhala. So there's been some kind of continuation of this inflowing force. So maybe there are grades and degrees of this impact. Okay, there we go. But apparently the destruction in Atlantis and the great process of individualization, which was also extremely destructive, are the two you might call direct hits. It's made its presence felt directly. Now the other places were per touches, we might say. Okay, and sometimes they're called impacts. Anyway, maybe there's a differentiation in the intensity of these touches. Okay, so the first time occurred in individualization, and the second was in the great battle between the lords of the dark face and the lords of the shining countenance. Very vivid terms, are they not? And we're still involved in that to a certain extent, and some of the leaders, as I've said, maybe Roosevelt, Churchill, Hitler, they were leaders also in the Great War in Atlantis. Today, this force streams out from the Holy Center. More and more, I would say. It embodies the will aspect of the present world crisis and has its two subsidiary effects, and its two subsidiary effects and qualities are, okay, the destruction of that which is undesirable and hindering in the present world forms in government, religion, and in society, and surely, we are witnessing this, and some people with great regret are watching old forms upon which they depended pass away, and they're holding on for dear life, and they can be called the reactionaries among us. And then not so much the destructive force, which I think is connected actually with the third aspect of the Shambhala force, but the synthesizing force, which binds together that which has hitherto been separated. And here we have, lots, what can we say, the second aspect is involved. And the third aspect in the other case, and to an extent the first aspect. Sometimes the first and third have a lot in common. They're on the same ray line. I'm remembering him talking about the death of a Hitler or of an evil doer being much different than the death of a Master Initiate Jesus or a Father Damien, So the Shambhala force is so new and so unrecognized that it is hard for humanity to know it for what it is. The demonstration of the beneficent will of God in new and potent livingness. So, well, we do have trouble as, according to our bias on this planet, the beneficence of destruction is rarely appreciated. We have a bias against it. Even our particular solar system, we are told, resists the incoming of the first ray force because it has to develop, first of all, the consciousness aspect. All right, that's the first force, the Shamballa force, trying to make itself known, appreciated, and effective. One of the three great streams of energy working powerfully in the world at this time. Then the hierarchical force, the second major force, which is potently making itself felt today, is that of the spiritual hierarchy. This is the planetary center where the love of God holds sway. That's the next emergent aspect. The beneficence of destruction, I think, can be appreciated only by very few. So this center where the love of God holds sway, hierarchy, as it swings into one of its major cyclic approaches to the earth. So hierarchy, let's see here. Okay, so hierarchy is approaching earth cyclically. Okay. The problem before the hierarchy at this time is to direct and control all five of the powerful energies that the divine plan can materialize. It's a balancing function, isn't it? When we find that intermediate center between humanity and Shamballa, hierarchy has a balancing function. And the close of this century, that's now the last century, so that it can see the purpose of God for humanity, assuming right direction and proportion. And we want to know, is this so? So is this now the case? We can see the opportunities, we can see the dangers. I remember a video in which a list of all the little organizations and organisms doing good in the direction of the New Age were, this list was given, and it was endless. It just kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Endlessly, it seemed. So obviously there are a lot of groups and people that are trying to help. And of course there are the forces of obstruction, and they are wielded by the reactionaries, often with a strong sixth ray, holding on to the past, which they think is incontrovertible. You know, this is the final statement in religion, this is the final statement in politics, and so forth. Okay, then the human force. It's the third major planetary center through which one of the three divine aspects, intelligence, is expressing itself, increasingly intelligent, producing world effects. So these three are operative. Okay. These three centers, the energy coming from them is operative, are operative. These three centers are operative in the world at this time. And we, being, let's call us a transitional phase within humanity, or a transitional group, let's say, indicating a transitional phase of trying to make our way into the fifth kingdom of nature, the kingdom of souls, and to instill in as many worthy people as possible that particular possibility if they will follow the right methods. The right methods are sorely wanting in familiarity, and we're trying to make them more familiar to many people so they'll know what to do. And of course, we have to apply them ourselves. These three centers are closely interrelated and must be thought of as expressions of divine livingness, as embodying three stages in the unfoldment of God's plan. You know, first intelligence, then love, then will, I guess. And as constituting the three major centers, head, heart, and throat, obviously, Shamballa, hierarchy, and humanity in that order. In the body, of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. So the Solar Logos is that one in whom we live and move and have our being. The Solar Logos is that one. Students can relate these three centers to the three solar systems, I guess the three major solar systems anyway. We've had, actually this is the fifth solar system, DK tells us, but then some of them were minor. Okay, so students can relate these three centers to the three solar systems referred to in the treatise on cosmic fire. In the first solar system, the first major solar system, which is really the fourth, the center, which is humanity, was prepared, and the principle of intelligence came into manifestation. Now, there's a fair number of people on this planet and probably in this solar system, but especially on this planet, who were, can we call it, individualized in the previous major solar system, the theme of which was the personality, and that's upon the mental plane, even as the theme of our present fifth or third major solar system is the soul. So in the first solar system, the center, which is humanity, was prepared, and the principle of intelligence came into manifestation. In the second solar system, the hierarchy of love made its appearance and must come, this is the future, into full manifestation, thereby enabling the love of God to be seen. Now, somehow this will happen. Our Solar Logos, we are told, will reach his fourth initiation minimally, and maybe even the fifth in this solar system. And in that case, the love of God will be powerfully manifest. We do have a Solar Logos who is a God of love. He's got a second ray personality in the solar system and always a second ray soul, and maybe a fourth ray monad, which is overarched, you might say, by a second ray monad. This question of how many monadic rays any entity has, it may well be a major monadic ray and a minor. In the next solar system, the center, which we call Shamballa, at least when speaking of our Earth, we don't know how centers of will on other planets are called, but presumably as entities, they must have all three aspects of divinity demonstrating. So in the next solar system, the center, which we call Shambhala, will manifest the will aspect of deity intelligently through love. And notice how the first two are included. We don't just somehow leave intelligence and love behind us. No, we incorporate them as subcategories in the manifestation of will in the next third major solar system, or the sixth. And yet there are 7 solar systems, and somehow there's some kind of combination in time of all the solar systems together in a synthetic manner that produces the 7th solar system. We don't actually know whether it's going to be a manifest system or a way of counting the solar systemic process. It is interesting to note that it is only through human beings that these 3 centers ever come into true functioning activity. So it's certainly not in the animal, and maybe there's been a transcendence in other and higher hierarchies. In the 4th human hierarchy, maybe these 3 come into active manifestation together. Because, you can still be a human being and be a member of the kingdom of souls. You can, well, when you're a Chohan, he is no longer a man like the members of the hierarchy who are of the 5th degree are, but still there are those who are related to the human kingdom, and they are Chohans, and they're certainly still members of the 4th creative hierarchy. So only through human beings, we're the middlemost center here on this planet, at least among the 7 that are manifesting on the cosmic physical plane. So only through us, these three centers come into true functioning activity, and likewise that the three major ideologies, the totalitarian, the democratic, the communistic, may be the response, distorted and yet responsive to the forces playing from the two higher centers onto the human. And this was discussed earlier. Basically, he told us that, the totalitarian system, which must be defeated, he tells us most earnestly, is a response to the Shamballa force. It's allied to monarchy, but is but tends to deprive those who live under its sway of the expression of their aspect of the divine will. So it must be defeated. Hierarchy, the energy of hierarchy is responded to through the creation of democracy, and apparently humanity has somehow created the communistic system on its own, from its own substance, we might say. However, he does say the three major ideologies are responses from the two higher centers, and in a way, communism, as it was intended in the time of Jesus, has to do with commune, with the community, with unity, and with love and non-separativeness in the community. So it has a lot of that alliance with democracy and with the hierarchy, let us say. Those of you who are seeking to serve humanity and to join in the hierarchical effort to bring healing to a world in pain, and there are all kinds of healings, remember, not just of the physical body. Those of the emotional nature are most important through blessing, and for certain advanced types, the healing of the mental nature, most important. Those of you who are seeking to serve humanity and to join in the hierarchical effort to bring healing to a world in pain must learn to penetrate behind appearances, behind the methods and schemes, maybe meaning plans, the results and effects on the physical plane, and endeavor to contact the forces of Shambhala or of the hierarchy, plus the human need, which has produced these modes of expression, because, Shambhala and hierarchy have been invoked and thus evoked to meet human need. It's a tendency, of course, though, to get all aspects of any entity into a synthetic condition at long last, plus the human need which has produced these modes of expression, and thus see them for what they are, not worn-out systems and childish efforts at improvement, but embryonic plans whereby eventually may come release and the culture and civilization of the new age. So we do not underestimate. Let's just say, whoa, what happened here? Yeah, that's what happened. So we do not underestimate the systems of government allied to the three great centers. And remembering that somehow even communism has in it, well, it has in it, I guess, something of the Shambhala force, because community is enforced, and yet the idea of the commune, which we saw in the consciousness revolution of the 1960s, 70s, and some places 80s, it has also the influence of hierarchy and unity and love, which produces unity, maybe both. So If you are seeking to bring illumination into the dark places of the earth, which means into the minds of men, goodness, look at that. That is an arresting statement. I mean, every one of us has to find those statements in the teaching which arrest our attention. I guess at the moment this arrested mine, that the human mind is one of the dark places of the earth. Well, I guess when we think about what people do think about and how far from reality those thoughts may be, then we have to acquiesce to the Tibetan statement here. Then you must yourselves see clearly and relate the abstract and the concrete in such a manner that in your own lives a working idealism may be seen. Not just an idealism, impractical, but a practical idealism. Yeah, let's just say practical. And that makes a real server, a practical mystic, a practical idealist. There's something about, how far the major concentration in the head descends, and if it sort of stays above the head, we have only the idealist, but if it descends further into the center of the head and uses the Ajna center, then we can have the practical idealist at work. Okay, so we need to work, obviously. A working idealism is desirable in all of our cases, otherwise we're just accumulating knowledge and we're guilty of a kind of glamour of aspiration, and there's a sort of a fourth veil of Maya on the etheric plane and between the etheric and astral. It's called the veil of aspiration, so we don't want to get caught in that trap. Okay. So only so can a working idealism of a national, racial, and human nature be seen. If we relate the concrete, the abstract, and the concrete, and to do that, the building of the Antikarana, the understanding of the Antikarana is needed. The head as well as the heart must be used. So, Venus is fusing head and heart, Jupiter is fusing head and heart, and this many earnest people are apt to forget. If we're earnest, we may be filled with aspiration, but it's not of much value because our aspiration is unguided by deep understanding and a practical mental approach and reinforced by the will. Sometimes those things are separated from each other. Can you possibly work at high tension in this endeavor? A tension produced by the interrelation of the head and the heart, working out creatively through the throat center, esoterically understood. Okay, well, there's a lot of capability that comes through the throat center, and simply the production of thought is not the only one. In this last sentence, I have expressed for disciples the nature of the effort they need to make. Let's look at it again, because the question is to us, and we have to pause for a moment, maybe more than a moment, to see to what extent we are complying. Can you possibly work at high tension, that is, at a high point of tension? Focused, immovable will is the definition of a point of tension. In this endeavor of fusing the heart and the head, a tension produced by the interrelation of the heart, the head, and the heart, working out creatively through the throat center, right? The creative center, especially once Uranus begins to be involved in it. Working through the throat center, esoterically understood, there comes a time when the seventh ray and its ability to produce magical thought and magical word begins to rule the throat center, and obviously Uranus, a major seventh-ray planet, would be implicated in that rulership. So, can we intelligently, full of the will inspired by the plan and with love, carry out this union of heart and throat and find a way to manifest the divine plan, both intelligently and lovingly, and as much in compliance with the will that drives the divine plan as on our planet as may be possible. Can we do that? Because for years and years, that's what we're going to have to do. The Aquarian age is coming, and don't think that on any of us who are serious about these matters that the load will be lightened. Will not. It is in the recognition of what is happening to mankind as a whole and behind the scenes that the thinkers of the world and the new group of world servers can best serve. Now, this is, terra incognita to most people, what's really happening behind the scenes here, and can we make our case in a convincing way, in a way that does not frighten people off or evoke their immediate rejection of the ideas proposed. We have to be so careful about how we speak and to whom we speak. The words we use, the thoughts behind the words, and yet it is our task to make, to a degree, an object of consideration what is happening behind the scenes. Think about that phrase, behind the scenes. Here we have the phantasmagoria registered by the senses, but what caused it all, What is substantial to it? What happened on the etheric plane? What is the motivation behind it? Towards what ends is it being guided by the mentality of higher agencies? There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and those who think there is not are simply materialists and have a shallow perspective on the life process. It is the unfoldment of the human consciousness in response to the presented conditions in any country or countries that is of moment. Now, somehow, this whole solar system is about the growth of consciousness. It's the fifth solar system and the second major, soul and consciousness, and their unfoldment are the objectives. Really, they are, in a way, the same thing, soul and consciousness. All right. The human state of mind is just beginning to focus itself on the things that matter and to express itself in a living fashion. Just beginning. We have to assess where we really are. It's not at a very high stage. It may be above where we have been before and may include potentials which are only now possible at this stage, but it's just beginning. The thinkers and servers must learn to concentrate upon the awakening consciousness and not upon the superficial movements, which can be, so arresting, can be so engaging. They can capture our attention, so these cannot exclusively capture our attention. The awakening goes on apace, and my brothers, satisfactorily, and this is from the perspective of a master. The form or forms may suffer, but the intrinsic awareness of man is becoming, during this century, expressively divine. And, what matter the suffering? At least that's the hierarchical perspective. The sense of values is so different, that perspective is different from the normal human state of mind, the perspective of the human state of mind. And we have to begin to develop the perspective of the hierarchy. We are on the border of hierarchical participation, as were the students in DK's groups, and we have to make that transition. Okay, the two other forces which tend to increase the steady prevalent tension are, okay, he's listing these a little differently than he did elsewhere. But anyway, the forces of materialism streaming out into the three worlds from the so-called dark forces or Black Lodge. He wants us to be careful about how we consider this group, because they actually do play a part in the plans of the solar logos, if not of the planetary logos, and from those groups of lives and workers which are the antithesis of the great White Lodge. Well, these are the, as they say, the forces of obstruction. So they are having their powerful effect upon many superficial thinkers. They may be powerful but superficial, who are responsive to them and who invest all of their attention on a curtailed view of the wide expanse of vibration which constitutes the cosmic physical plane. And then, he reversed these actually. Elsewhere, it was the Black Lodge, which are coming under rays 1 and 5, which was in the 5th position, and the Jewish force coming under rays 3 and 7 in the 4th position. The force emanating from that section of humanity which is found in every part of the world, because you see, we no longer know who the Jews really are from the perspective of the previous solar system. They may be now in what we call Jewish bodies, or they may not. They are the nomads, and they carried that 3rd ray and I suppose strong 7th ray vibration from the previous solar system. So the force emanating from that section of humanity, which is found in every part of the world, in which we call the Jewish people. What I have here, what I say here has no specific reference to any individual. I am considering the world problem centering around the Jews as a whole. From one perspective, he says that if the Jews reorient themselves and get it right, they can form something of an aristocracy of humanity and a method of guidance. And certainly their achievements have been outstanding in many respects. No, maybe this is going to bring us to where yes, it is, and it's in this book. Okay, and maybe we're not far from it at all. Well, as you see, he put the Jewish force in the 4th position with rays 7, the 7th aspect of the 3rd ray. It wasn't just ray 7; it was the 7th aspect of the 3rd ray, and I'm just noticing that. You see, you can read not without sufficient care, and I did read without sufficient care. I said it's ray 1 and 5, but in fact it's the 5th ray aspect of the 1st ray, which is connected with the materialistic forces of the Black Lodge, and it's connected with the Deva kingdom as well, which is the sacral center. Various kingdoms represent various centers on our planet, and the Deva, the sacral center, and some of these forces of materialism have a great deal of control over some of the lower devas, which they can command and direct at their will. So, the forces of Mahat, or mind, they can lead off in directions which tend to make the concrete mind its own vehicle, and this the Tibetan considers to be an unmitigated disaster. And the source of the ill-omened reputation of the number 13, because there you'd have 12 creative hierarchies, and then you'd have this walling off of the concrete mind and its tremendous development under certain Devic aspects. It would be the force of Mahat with no association to the force of love. So here's exactly this is exactly what I was talking about. Only I was looking in the wrong book, and we'll come to that again because we're not far from it. We're on page 73 or 74, and page 90 is coming up. All right, so where are we here? These two forces greatly complicate the problem by which humanity and the hierarchy are faced. But it should be remembered that they also produce that balancing which is ever needed for the production of right conditions. Sometimes progressives in our political arena at this time decry the reactionary attitude of certain politicians and social groups that seem to be holding back progressive developments. But if DK can talk about the Jewish force and the forces of materialism, the Black Lodge, as providing some kind of balancing, then certainly we can look at the political arena and say, okay, progress seems to be held back, but maybe some kind of balance is being preserved. It's hard to think in that way when we see the potentials. All right. There is little that I can tell you about the dark forces, though in a way he tells us much over the course of his many books. They are not the problem of humanity, but that of the hierarchy. And, that's what Master Moria seems to be saying when he tells us that we trouble ourselves about a few minor demons when, for them, the hierarchy, the daggers of Satan are aimed at their back. Shamballa has to deal with that. The task of these forces is the preservation of the form life and the working out of methods and aims which are inherent in the processes of manifestation. Well, that in itself doesn't sound bad, except when there's a retrogression at a time that is meant to see a progression, and such a deliberate, willful reinforcement of form that the contents of form, that which is supposed to be developed through the agency of form, has a stunted opportunity to develop in the right way. The Black Lodge, so-called, is occupied with the form aspect of manifestation. Interesting that while matter is associated with the third aspect of divinity, form per se is associated with the second, and we cannot think that there are not Black Lodge representatives on all the three major rays and maybe on all seven. The White Lodge with the consciousness aspect. And that, I think, is as far as we're going to go on this particular work. Tuya and I have a broadcast on the reappearance of the Christ coming up in just a half hour, so this is where we will take it up to this point, and I guess we're on page 75, and maybe I can transfer some of this down so that we, know where we are, or at least so that I know where I am, as I always manage to get a little bit lost when approaching these matters. Okay. All right. So this is the end of program number 4. And what day does it occur? It occurs on the 10th. And it's from page 71 to 75, I believe I said. I hope I'm correct. And the next one will be from page 75. It'll be program 5. What date it will be, I don't know. Later tonight, maybe, or maybe not. I just grab the moments when I can and share with you my rather spontaneous responses. I don't know about the accuracy of everything I say, but at least as if I were teaching a class or as if we were together, I offer you my impressions, and if it seems to stimulate in you some thoughts or takes you off in the direction of your own thoughts or amplifications, that's what we need. And I think you can see how much that is written here, even though it is, quasi-historical. It's dealing with the developments that were at the outset of taking place at the outset of the Second World War. It has immediate relevance to every disciple. I mean, we are in a war, and what he says about a war has merely to be transferred to the inner planes, because that's where it seems temporarily that our war is being waged, and we sincerely hope that we are strong enough to keep it from precipitating into the outer realm where it could mean a huge retardation for humanity and the destruction of, finally, of humanity itself. Well, those anticipations were found in an early introduction to the problems of humanity. They were since eliminated from that. And maybe there were assurances from Foster Bailey and some of his writings in the 1950s that the Tibetan had assured him that no atomic war would occur. We don't know, because the Tibetan was not writing per se after that point. He was looking for no new amanuensis, he told us, because people are ever eager to be the amanuensis of the Tibetan, But he did promise that around the year 2025, maybe in 2025 itself, there would be the beginning of the final installment in this series of bridging treatises, and towards that we look with eagerness, and I'm sure for many of us it will involve studies in our next life, and for some of you, studies in this life. So how fortunate we are. Okay, that's it for the moment, the end there of number 4, and we'll go on to number 5 when it is possible. Many blessings, lots of love. Let's proceed and correlate everything that we can. Let the light shine forth and let us apply what we see, what we know, what we understand. Bye-bye.